Hi everyone, my name is Frede and today I'm going to be talking about the next 5 books that I read in 2018. I have lost count. I think this might be books 41 to 45. I'm not sure. But that doesn't matter. I have 5 more books to talk about that I recently read. The first book that I finished was Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. This was a really fun book. I hadn't anticipated a classic to be fun in this way. Basically, in the story you follow a young man whose name I can't even remember because he's kind of useless. He moves to a new house and I think his landlord or his neighbor, something like that, is a big asshole, and he's like, why is this person like that? And he talks to his servant, and his servant, who's called Nellie, who is an angel, she talks about the past that this, I think it's his landlord, has. And that's kind of the story. Most people probably know the plot because it is a classic. I had not read it before. I think the best word to describe this novel is melodramatic, and that made the book a lot of fun. And basically you follow 2 different timelines, first of like the young Heathcliff and his lover, sort of, and then also the present with the old Heathcliff and what's going on then. I don't even want to say much more because the fun about this book is the way that it is so overly dramatic and the way the story unfolds. There are also a few like little gothic elements at the end of the novel which I thought was fantastic, and yeah, this was just a lot of fun. I can't really say much more about it. As I said, the protagonist, sort of, who is the narrator in the beginning and the end of the novel, he didn't have to be in there. He was useless. Like, I mean, as I said, I can't remember his name, so yeah, but I really enjoyed reading this book. So the next one that I am going to talk about is a book that talks about rape culture, so in case you don't want to hear me talk about that, I will leave a timestamp like here on the screen but also in the description, so as I said, in case you don't want to hear this at all, you can like skip ahead. Basically the book that I read is called Asking for It, The Alarming Rise of Rape Culture and What We Can Do About It by Kate Harding. This book sat on my TBR for such a long time. And I kind of forgot about it for a while. Then I saw a video over at Harriet Rosie's channel where she talked about her master's dissertation, and she kind of got the idea from this book, and I was like, oh, I own that book. So I eventually decided to pick it up, and it's basically what the title says. It discusses rape culture. What do people mean when they say rape culture? Why is that a thing? You know, there are a lot of people who say, oh, we don't live in a rape culture, and she explains why that's not true. There are a lot of systems in place that allow for sexual assault and rape to happen, and that, you know, blame everything on the victim rather than the perpetrator of the crime. This is an infuriating book. Obviously it talks about how so many people do so many horrible things and they just get away with it. It talks about how police and lawyers very often are useless when it comes to persecuting rape cases. She kind of untangles this whole system around conversations around rape, and yeah, that's basically how the book goes. As I said, it's infuriating, it's upsetting, extremely upsetting. The writing is very accessible. Sometimes it's almost a bit too chatty. I thought, like, it does feel like you're having a conversation, but she's still writing a book and it's still supposed to be at least somewhat serious. Sometimes I thought, okay, you might have wanted to turn that down a bit. But I think it's a very insightful book that shows like all the levels of society on which we as members of the society fuck up. So yeah, that's kind of all I want to say about it. If this is a topic that interests you, I mean, do give it a read. But obviously it is also quite horrible, which is, you know, what you would expect from a book like that. But I did think it was really well done for trying to do what it did. The next book I want to talk about is a book that I read in like 2 days, which is very fast for me. And that is a book I've been wanting to read for a while. I'm really happy that I finally got to it, and that is Room by Emma Donoghue. This book was really popular a few years ago, so most of you probably know what it's about. In case you don't, this is the story of a little boy and his mother. And the little boy is 5 years old at the beginning of the novel, and all he knows is room, spelled with a capital R. That's where he has spent the first 5 years of his life, with his mother. There is nothing else. And going into this, I thought that was the entire story, which is not the case. They do escape from the room at some point, rather early on in the novel actually, and now it's about how this young boy who has never known anything else adapts to life in the real world. It's such a well done novel, and it tore my heart apart in some passages, especially in the beginning when they were still in the room, because as I said, the boy, he doesn't know anything else, so room is spelled with a capital R. The story is told from the boy's perspective, and I can imagine that child narrators are the most difficult thing to get right, and I think this one just did it brilliantly. Because, as I said, you have the perspective of the boy, and he doesn't know anything else apart from this room, so a lot of things in the room are spelled with a capital letter, and they are really, like, they are personified, and that's just so heartbreaking. Like, every evening when the boy goes to sleep, he's like, good night chair, capital C, good night lamp, capital L, good night, well, whatever, like, pillow, capital P, good night room, capital R. And it's like, because he doesn't know anything else, you know, he knows his mother, he does know, well, his biological father, who also, like, trigger warning for rape because, you know, his mother was raped, but he doesn't know anything else, and it's so heartbreaking. And I also think the way everything is described after they get out of the room is just, it's just done so well. I felt like Emma Donoghue really researched the topic very well. And yeah, I think at some part in the middle, the pacing was a tiny bit off. But apart from that, this was just such a fantastic novel. It is quite upsetting, as I said, trigger warning for rape for this novel. Also, the mother suffers from, I suppose, PTSD after they get out of the room. So trigger warning for that and the horrible things that come along with it. But it's just such a well put together novel, and if you can handle horrible things such as that, I think this book totally deserves all the praise that it got a few years ago. I thought it was so good. The next book that I finished I don't have here with me because I didn't like it. I read that on the train and I just left the book on the train. It was a play by Harold Pinter called The Birthday Party. I had read one other Harold Pinter play before, so I kind of knew what I was in for. The other play by him that I read before was The Homecoming. I had to read this one for class a few years ago, and this one felt kind of just the same, just not as good. I mean, The Homecoming also, I didn't really love it, but I saw its merits, whereas with The Birthday Party, it just felt kind of stupid. So basically what you have in this book is you have a married couple, they're like middle-aged to like sort of old. They sort of have a boarding house where no one really stays. There is one young man who stays there, and then you also have two other men who are like, I don't know, middle-aged or in their 30s or something, and a young woman. Those are the characters in the play, and one day these two men come to this boarding house and they're like, hey, can we stay here? And the woman who owns this boarding house with her husband, she's like, oh, our young tenant here, he has his birthday today and she wants to do a birthday party for him. And he's like, it's not my birthday. And she's like, but it is. And then they have a birthday party. And it's really weird. There are a lot of confusions about like names and places and people, but it felt pointless. It felt completely pointless. I also have a big issue with how Harold Pinter writes women characters. I already thought that in The Homecoming. There's only one female character and she's just kind of useless. She doesn't have any agency. I don't know, all the men are like, oh, you know, we're gonna do this to you and this to you. And she's like, okay. And now in The Birthday Party, there are two women characters. First of all, like the woman who owns the boarding house. She's so stupid. And she has no brain. She literally has no brain. And then there is another young woman who, she's, I don't know, she has no character. Like, she's the imagination of a straight man writing a cool, interesting, but also at fault for everything that happens to her female character. And I don't like that. The entire plot was just stupid. There was just nothing to it. I really didn't like this play, so I left the book on the train. Maybe someone else will enjoy it, but I certainly didn't. And the last book that I finished was a quite tiny one, and that is Extracts from the Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. Now, in case you haven't heard of The Second Sex, it's a non-fiction text that Simone de Beauvoir wrote in, I believe, the 40s? Basically mostly about the way that women are treated in society, the way that their gender is constructed. You know, if you study anything relating to humanities, you're probably familiar with her. And so I was quite curious because I have never read anything by her. I only knew like the the gist of what she says. And so I picked this one up, and basically, first of all, it puts her work into perspective, like kind of puts it in a context. Then you have the introduction to the book, then you have one chapter from the book, and then you have the conclusion to the book. The original, I think, is about 700 or 800 pages long. So this one is about 120. So as expected, it does feel like there is a lot missing. I think maybe if you're not at all familiar with Simone de Beauvoir's ideas, this might be interesting to kind of just get a little insight. I knew enough for this to be like, okay, I know this already. So I thought that was a bit of a letdown in a way, but that's not because the book is bad. I just think I should have just picked up the full version, but that's a long book. So the chapter that is in here that's taken from the original book is about working women, which I thought was very interesting. You have she talks about different sort of paths that women even have, as, you know, if they want to work. And I thought the discussions there were really interesting. Obviously the introduction and the conclusion are for the entire book, so you do see what else there would be in there. So as I said, in case you're not at all familiar, or you don't know if you want to commit to this huge book that is The Second Sex, this might be interesting because you can kind of get a feeling of the text. But if you know what she talks about already and just want to read it, I would not recommend this because, as I said, it's just a little introduction. So this was interesting reading it, but it left me wanting a bit more because I knew most of this already, like that she says this, so yeah. So these were the next 5 books that I finished in 2018. Some that were really good, some not so much, but very interesting mix of everything. If you've read any of them, do let me know what you thought of them. If you've read the entirety of The Second Sex, I would be very interested to hear how you felt about reading it, because I'm quite intrigued, but it is a huge book. So we'll see whether I want to commit to that. As always, all the links to my bookish social media are in the description. Thank you all for watching this video, and I will hopefully see you in my next one. Bye!